In the history of world civilizations, the cultures of Central and South America are often regarded as later developments, especially in comparison to the early advanced civilizations of Asia, Europe, or the Near East. However, this temporal delay in no way means that their history is less significant or less fascinating. On the contrary, it was in this very region that one of the most complex and simultaneously most enigmatic civilizations of the New World emerged: the civilization of the Aztecs. When people talk about the Aztecs today, many immediately think of massive stone pyramids, colorful garments, and above all, the notorious rituals of human sacrifice. This image is deeply anchored in the collective memory and has shaped the reputation of this culture up to the present day. Yet behind these impressive and often shocking ideas lay a highly organized society with clear social structures, sophisticated religious concepts, and an astounding ability to adapt to a challenging environment. The Aztec civilization developed in the heart of present-day Mexico and reached its greatest power between the 14th and early 16th centuries. In this relatively short period, the Aztecs created an empire that encompassed millions of people, gave rise to one of the largest cities in the world at the time, and developed a complex interplay of agriculture, warfare, religion, and politics. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was an urban center that both fascinated and terrified European conquerors. But how could a society that managed without draft animals, without iron weapons, and without modern technology build such an empire? What role did religion, warfare, and sacrifice play in their daily lives? And why did this powerful empire collapse within a few years when confronted with a completely foreign world? To answer these questions, it is worth taking a closer look at the origins, lifestyle, and worldview of the Aztecs. Only then does it become clear that their history is much more than a narrative of blood and violence, but rather a complex chapter of human history that continues to resonate today. Part 1. Origin and historical background of the Aztec civilization. When speaking of the great advanced civilizations of world history, many people initially think of Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, or the Mediterranean. Although the civilizations of Central and South America developed significantly later than those in Europe or Asia, this temporal delay makes their history no less remarkable. One of the best-known and simultaneously most fascinating cultures of this region is the Aztec civilization, which unfolded in the central highlands of present-day Mexico and reached its peak between the 14th and 16th centuries. The name Aztec alone evokes images of stone pyramids, colorful garments, and notorious human sacrifices. Yet behind these striking ideas lies a complex society with a long preceding history. Like many other advanced civilizations, the Aztec civilization emerged from a fertile natural environment. With its plains, lakes, and swamps, the area of Mesoamerica offered favorable conditions for the development of sedentary societies. While rice cultivation in China and wheat in Egypt formed the basis of economic life, in Central America it was primarily maize that became the most important livelihood. In addition to maize, the inhabitants of this region also grew beans, squash, tomatoes, cacao, and other plants that still play a central role in the diet today. This agricultural base enabled the emergence of larger settlements and complex social structures. The first significant advanced civilization detectable in Mesoamerica was that of the Olmecs, whose origins date back to around 1200 BC. The Olmecs were master sculptors and created monumental stone figures that are still considered testimonies to their artistry today. At the same time, they practiced religious rituals, including human sacrifice. Many of these cultural elements had a lasting influence on later civilizations, particularly the Maya and the cultures in the Valley of Mexico. After the decline of the Olmec civilization, numerous city-states gradually emerged, among which the Maya rose to become the most culturally and scientifically significant power. As the classic Maya civilization gradually entered a phase of decline, Central America experienced a period of cultural upheaval. While some cultural achievements declined, warfare techniques and political structures simultaneously continued to develop. During this era, another great civilization emerged, which was viewed with great admiration by the later Aztecs. This culture also eventually disappeared, but its influence remained and profoundly shaped subsequent societies. In today's perception, the Maya and the Aztecs are frequently confused with each other, or even regarded as one and the same culture. In fact, however, the Aztecs did not appear on the historical stage until the 13th century, long after the classic Maya civilization had already weakened. The relatively late development of the peoples of Central America compared to Europe or Asia had several causes. The dense network of forests and mountains made exchange between regions difficult, and there were also no large metal deposits that would have favored rapid technological development. The limited cultural contact between the individual peoples meant that innovations spread only slowly. These structural disadvantages would later prove to have serious consequences. The slow technological development and ongoing conflicts between various tribes and city-states weakened the region sustainably. They contributed decisively to the fact that the Aztecs could offer little resistance to the later confrontation with the Spanish conquerors. But before this dramatic collapse occurred, a society with extremely complex economic, social, and religious structures developed in the heart of present-day Mexico. To understand how this civilization functioned, it is first worth taking a closer look at its everyday life and, in particular, the foundations of its agriculture and economy. Part 2. Agriculture and Economic Life of the Aztecs. Aztec society was based on agriculture in almost all areas. For the Aztecs, farming was not just an economic activity, but the foundation of their entire social and political system. The most important staple food was maize, which thrived particularly well in the humid climate of the Valley of Mexico. In addition, the Aztecs grew beans, squash, potatoes, tomatoes, avocados, pineapples, cacao, and tobacco. Among all these plants, maize held a prominent position as it secured the majority of the daily diet and also possessed religious significance. The natural conditions of the Valley of Mexico, which was characterized by numerous lakes and wetlands, enabled an intensive form of agriculture. One of the most important innovations of the Aztecs was the construction of so-called chinampas. These were artificially created islands that allowed shallow waters to be converted into extremely fertile cultivated areas. These islands were built up from layers of mud from the lake bottom, organic material, and plant remains, and then separated from one another by canals. The narrow waterways allowed farmers to reach their fields by canoe and transport the harvest efficiently. The chinampas were among the most productive agricultural areas in the world at that time. Thanks to the constant water supply and nutrient-rich soils, they could yield an average of up to 7 harvests per year. Estimates suggest that 1 hectare of chinampa was capable of permanently feeding about 20 people. This extraordinary productivity formed the basis for the Aztecs being able to support a large population without having to constantly clear new agricultural land. To further optimize agricultural production, the Aztecs developed a sophisticated system of artificial irrigation. Most agricultural enterprises were located outside the large cities, while complex aqueducts were built in urban centers to bring in fresh water from rivers, lakes, and springs. At the same time, a system existed for collecting organic waste, which was reused as fertilizer in agriculture. Through this form of intensive agriculture, it was possible to permanently supply large cities and maintain a certain level of stability even in times of crisis. In addition to agriculture, the lakes of the Valley of Mexico played a crucial role in the diet. They provided a variety of food sources, including fish, amphibians, crustaceans, insects, insect eggs, and waterfowl. This rich supply of animal protein meant that the Aztecs kept relatively few domestic animals. Chickens or dogs were only bred to a small extent, as the natural resources of the lakes largely met the demand. The agricultural surplus allowed a significant portion of the population to pursue activities outside of food production. In addition to housework, women were often busy weaving fabrics from agave or cotton fibers. Men worked as craftsmen, producing ceramics, tools made of stone, obsidian, and flint, jewelry, featherwork, and musical instruments. Metal played only a subordinate role in Aztec daily life, but the Aztecs possessed basic knowledge of metalworking, particularly in dealing with gold. For the Aztecs, gold had less practical and more symbolic value. They regarded it as a sacred metal and a gift from the sun. For this reason, gold was often combined with precious stones such as jade or turquoise, and used primarily for religious or representative purposes. The economic strength of Aztec cities was thus based not solely on agricultural productivity, but also on a differentiated craft system that strengthened the internal cohesion of society and ensured the prosperity of the urban centers. Part 3. Social structure and social order of the Aztecs. Aztec society was strictly hierarchically organized and based on a clear division into different social strata. At the top were the members of the nobility, whose position was primarily determined by descent. This upper class enjoyed numerous privileges, including the right to wear particularly magnificent clothing, consume luxury goods, and own land. The most powerful among them were the so-called lords or princes, who controlled large estates and held high offices in the state apparatus, the military or the religious sphere. Despite their power, the nobility represented only a small part of the total population, comprising an estimated 5% of Aztec society. The second large social group was formed by the common free citizens. Originally, many of them were small farmers who worked in the fields and ensured agricultural production. Over time, however, this group evolved and included a large part of the working population, accounting for about 20% of society. They were responsible for supplying the cities with food and formed the economic backbone of the empire. In addition to agriculture, they also provided labor for public construction projects and state tasks. The vast majority of the population, around 80%, was composed of warriors, craftsmen, and traders. Craftsmen in particular played an important role in urban life, as their products made a significant contribution to the prosperity of the cities. Ceramics, jewelry, tools, and artistic objects were not only intended for daily use, but also served as trade and tribute goods. Traders, in turn, ensured the exchange of goods between different regions of the empire, thereby contributing to economic networking. A special position was held by slaves. In Aztec society, slavery was not a fixed condition from birth, but was often the result of debt or extreme poverty. Those who could not fulfill their obligations could temporarily place themselves or a family member in the service of a nobleman. Although these people lost their freedom, they retained certain rights and could, under certain circumstances, leave their position again. The social order of the Aztecs was thus less rigid than it might appear at first glance. Also noteworthy is the possibility of social advancement, particularly through military achievement. A common citizen could rise to the nobility through bravery in war. The decisive factor was the capture of enemy warriors. Each captured enemy increased the warrior's prestige and brought him new honors, special clothing, weapons, and insignia. As the number of captives grew, so did his rank within society, making war a central means of social advancement. Within the family, the Aztecs regarded kinship on both the paternal and maternal sides as equal. Inheritance law applied to both sons and daughters, giving women the right to own property. This regulation provided women with a degree of economic independence. Nevertheless, society was clearly organized according to gender roles. Men were predominantly active outside the home, for example in agriculture, trade, crafts, or as warriors. Women primarily looked after the household, but could also work as traders, healers, priestesses, or midwives. This social order gave Aztec society stability, but also a strong dynamic. Duty, honor, and religious beliefs were closely linked and determined each individual's place within the community. This became particularly clear in the area of the military and warfare, which possessed not only political but also deep religious significance. Part 4. Military and warfare of the Aztecs' war held an exceptionally high status in Aztec society. It was not just a means of territorial expansion or securing political power, but possessed a deep religious meaning. For the Aztecs, war was inseparably linked to belief in the gods and was considered a necessary prerequisite for maintaining the balance of the world. Just like combat on the battlefield, the birth of a child was seen as an act of comparable importance, as both served the continued existence of the cosmic order. Aztec warfare differed from that of many other cultures in one central point. The goal was often not to kill the enemy, but to take him alive as a prisoner. These prisoners were later sacrificed in religious rituals and were considered valuable gifts to the gods. For this reason, the ability to overpower and bind opponents was of greater importance than mere killing. Warriors who took numerous prisoners enjoyed high prestige and could rise rapidly within society. The equipment of an Aztec warrior usually consisted of a round shield and a wooden weapon embedded with sharp blades made of obsidian or shell fragments. This weapon, known as the macuahuitl, could cause severe injuries and was simultaneously suitable for incapacitating the opponent. In addition, spears and other close combat weapons were used. Although the bow and arrow were also known, they played a subordinate role compared to other weapons. Armor mostly consisted of thick cotton, which was surprisingly resistant to simple weapons. All male members of the Aztec Empire received basic military training from a young age. Members of the nobility were trained particularly intensively, not only in combat but also in religious and strategic matters. War was a task for the entire society and not a privilege of individual groups. Military training shaped discipline, courage, and obedience, qualities that were considered central virtues in the Aztec worldview. Before starting a campaign, the Aztecs prepared over a longer period, which could last up to 60 days. This phase was characterized by religious ceremonies in which the support of the gods was requested. The war was only begun once the appropriate rituals had been performed. After a victory, Aztec warriors entered the temples of the defeated enemies and extinguished the sacred fire. This symbolic act was intended to demonstrate the superiority of their own war god and the submission of the opponent. The outward appearance of the warriors also played an important role. Nobles and experienced fighters wore striking, colorful armor and helmets that often represented animal forms. This clothing served not only for protection, but also as a reminder of their own heroic deeds. On the battlefield, everyone was meant to see what rank a warrior held and what successes he had already achieved. Aztec military affairs were thus much more than a purely organizational or tactical matter. It was deeply embedded in religion, society, and ideology. War meant honor, duty, and sacrifice at the same time. To fully understand this military culture, it is necessary to also look at the intellectual and cultural achievements of the Aztecs, as knowledge, art, and religion together formed the foundation of their civilization. Part 5. Culture, Education, and Knowledge of the Aztecs. Compared to other advanced Mesoamerican civilizations, such as the Maya or the Inca, the Aztecs left behind what seems to be a smaller cultural heritage, but it was by no means less remarkable. On the contrary, they took a pioneering role in several areas. Particularly noteworthy is their educational system, as the Aztecs were among the first societies in the world to have compulsory education for all children. Education was not seen as a privilege of the upper class, but as a necessary foundation for the existence of the state and the maintenance of social order. Children were systematically educated from a young age and prepared for their later role in society. Boys received training that prepared them for life as warriors, craftsmen, or officials, while girls were trained primarily for their tasks in the household and in social life. Nevertheless, education was not a purely practical process. Moral values, religious duties, and social responsibility were at the center of education and profoundly shaped people's self-image. The Aztecs had their own writing system, which consisted of a combination of pictorial signs and phonetic symbols. This system was relatively well structured, but was still in an early stage of development and had not evolved into a fully abstract script. The script served primarily to record historical events, religious rituals, tributes, and lists of rulers. Had the Spanish conquests not led to the violent destruction of many documents, it would have been entirely possible for this writing system to have developed further over time. In the field of astronomy, the Aztecs also possessed remarkable knowledge. They carefully observed the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, and used these findings to structure their calendar system. The most important calendar was based on a solar year of 365 days, which was divided into 18 months of 20 days each. At the end of the year, 5 additional days were inserted, which were considered particularly dangerous and were accompanied by religious rituals. In addition to this solar calendar, a second calendar existed that was used primarily for religious and divinatory purposes. This calendar determined auspicious and inauspicious days for certain actions and played a central role in the spiritual life of the Aztecs. Every 52 years, both calendar systems met and marked the beginning of a new cycle. This event was observed with the so-called New Fire ceremony, in which all fires in the empire were extinguished. Only after a human sacrifice was a new sacred fire lit and carried into all households to ensure the continued existence of the world. Aztec cultural life was closely linked to religious ideas. Knowledge, timekeeping, and education served not only practical purposes, but were expressions of a worldview in which the survival of the universe depended on the correct fulfillment of divine duties. This interplay of knowledge and belief shaped not only daily life, but also formed the basis for art, rituals, and religious practices that occupied a particularly central place in the lives of the Aztecs. Part 6. Art, Rituals, and Human Sacrifice in Aztec Culture. Aztec culture was characterized by an extraordinary variety of artistic expressions. Although many testimonies of this culture were destroyed by wars and disease, enough traces have nevertheless survived to recognize its significance. For the Aztecs, art was not an end in itself, but a means to depict religion, history, and daily life. Painting, ceramics, and sculpture in particular played a central role. Paintings were executed on animal hides, in stone, wood, or ceramics, and followed clear design rules. Black lines, strong red tones, and bright colors dominated the depictions, which often showed religious scenes, historical events, or everyday situations. The ceramic art of the Aztecs was equally distinct. Vessels and everyday objects were often decorated with complex patterns and symbols, usually on a dark or orange background. These objects not only served practical purposes, but also reflected the aesthetic standards and religious ideas of their creators. Even after the collapse of the Aztec Empire, many of these artistic traditions lived on and influenced the local culture for generations. A particularly highly valued art form was the creation of pictures from feathers. These works were extremely elaborate and required great manual skill. The artisans combined feathers of various bird species into detailed compositions and attached them to support materials using special techniques. Due to the difficulty of preserving feathers over long periods, only a few original Aztec feather artworks remain today. The craftsmen who mastered this art enjoyed high prestige within society. Probably the best known and simultaneously most misunderstood aspect of Aztec culture is the ritual of human sacrifice. To comprehend its meaning, it is necessary to understand the Aztec worldview. According to their belief, the gods were in a constant cycle of death and rebirth so that the universe and all life could continue to exist. Human sacrifices were seen as a necessary source of energy to maintain this cosmic process and ensure that the sun rose again every morning. For the Aztecs, it was a great honor to fall in battle or to be offered as a sacrifice to the gods. Most sacrifices were prisoners of war who had been deliberately captured alive in battles. Various forms of sacrifice rituals existed, but the most common consisted of stretching the victim's body on a sacrificial stone, opening the chest with a knife made of obsidian or jade, and cutting out the heart to offer it to the gods. The warriors believed that in this way they would become companions of the sun after death. In the course of a year, the Aztecs celebrated a total of 18 major religious festivals, many of which were associated with human sacrifice. These rituals were not an expression of cruelty in the modern sense, but a central component of a religious system based on sacrifice, duty, and cosmic responsibility. Art, rituals, and beliefs formed an inseparable whole and profoundly shaped the thinking and actions of Aztec society. To grasp the full significance of this culture, it is now necessary to turn one's gaze toward the heart of the Aztec Empire, its impressive capital and its monumental architecture. Part 7. Architecture and the Capital City. Tenochtitlan. Aztec architectural skill reached its peak in their capital, Tenochtitlan, the political, religious, and cultural center of the empire. This city was built on an island in Lake Texcoco and was surrounded by water, which not only gave it a strategic location, but also shaped its unique appearance. Contemporary accounts by Spanish conquerors describe Tenochtitlan as a city of extraordinary size and beauty, the sight of which reminded many of them of a vision or a dream. The construction of the city testified to a deep understanding of urban planning and engineering. An extensive network of canals ran through Tenochtitlan, allowing the transport of people and goods by boat. These waterways connected the city with the surrounding mainland and were supplemented by causeways and bridges that could be quickly dismantled in the event of an attack. In this way, the city could be effectively defended. At the same time, paved streets and squares ensured order and structure within the urban space. The Aztecs used large amounts of volcanic rock, limestone, and wood to construct monumental buildings. Particularly striking was the use of gold to decorate religious buildings. Temples and shrines were adorned with depictions of stars, animals, and plants, including motifs such as butterflies, birds, and dragonflies, which held strong symbolic meaning. The mighty pyramids and towers rising from the water left a lasting impression on all visitors. Another remarkable aspect of Tenochtitlan was its gardens and zoological facilities. The Aztecs laid out botanical gardens in which they cultivated a variety of plants, as well as animal enclosures and water facilities in which reptiles, birds, and fish were kept. Particularly impressive was the system of freshwater and saltwater pools that provided suitable habitats for different animal species. These facilities served not only for entertainment, but also for the study of nature and the demonstration of imperial power. Thanks to the efficient agricultural organization and the Chinampas, Tenochtitlan was able to support a large part of its population itself, even in times of war or disease. Within the city, people moved around both on foot and by boat. A sophisticated water supply system channeled fresh water into the city daily, while thousands of workers ensured cleanliness and order. Waste was disposed of regularly, making Tenochtitlan one of the cleanest and best organized cities of the time. In the center of the city rose the Templo Mayor, a massive stepped pyramid complex that formed the religious heart of the empire. Broad staircases led to two shrines at the top of the structure, one dedicated to the rain god Tlaloc and the other to the war god Huitzilopochtli. This was where the most important religious ceremonies and human sacrifices took place. The temple was expanded several times over the years and eventually reached a height of about 100 meters, making it one of the largest structures of its era. Since there were no draft animals in the Aztec Empire, water transport played a crucial role. Traders and porters moved incessantly between the markets, ports, and warehouses of the city. The well-organized canal system, stable infrastructure, and monumental buildings made Tenochtitlan one of the most advanced and largest cities of the ancient world. Yet despite all this grandeur and order, this city was soon to become the scene of dramatic events that would change the fate of the Aztec Empire forever. Part 8. Mythology and Worldview of the Aztecs. The Aztec civilization was deeply permeated by religious ideas, and its mythology formed the foundation of its worldview. This world of belief was not static, but the result of a long cultural heritage that absorbed and further developed influences from earlier civilizations. At the center of Aztec creation beliefs was Ometeotl, a dual-gendered deity who united both the male and female principles. Ometeotl manifested as Ometecutli, the divine father, and Omechihuatl, the divine mother. From their union came 4 sons, who were regarded as the primary gods of the Aztec pantheon. These 4 deities were worshipped under various aspects, and each represented a cardinal direction and a specific color. Despite numerous variations of the myths, the most common idea is that they were jointly involved in the creation of the world. Their task was to bring order to chaos and create the foundations for life. But this process was marked by conflict, for the world did not emerge peacefully, but through sacrifice and destruction. A central motif of the creation story is the monster Chipactli, a massive being with characteristics of a crocodile and a frog, whose body was covered with sharp teeth. This being devoured everything the gods created. To defeat Chipactli, one of the gods sacrificed a part of his body as bait. After the monster was killed, the gods formed the world from its body. From one part the sky was created, from another the underworld, and from the rest of the body the earth was formed, surrounded by water. In this way, the world was understood as a place that had emerged from divine sacrifice. In addition to these creation narratives, a complex world of gods developed in which each deity controlled certain aspects of life. The rain god Tlaloc ruled over water and fertility, while Mictlantecutli, as ruler of the underworld, watched over death. Particularly significant was Huitzilopochtli, the war god and patron saint of the Aztecs. He was regarded as the one who had led the people to their new settlement area and whose will determined military success. A special place was held by Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wind, light, wisdom, culture, and the arts. Quetzalcoatl was worshipped as the creator of modern humanity and stood in contrast to Tezcatlipoca, the god of the night, mountains, magic, and war. Tezcatlipoca was considered powerful, unpredictable, and at the same time strictly just. The constant conflict between these two deities ran like a red thread through Aztec mythology and shaped numerous stories about the course of the world. A central element of the Aztec worldview was the idea of the five suns, each representing its own world era. According to Aztec belief, there had already been 4 previous worlds before the current one, each ruled by a different deity and destroyed by catastrophes. The first world ended by jaguars, the second by massive storms, the third by rain of fire, and the fourth by an all-consuming flood. According to legend, the survivors of these worlds transformed into animals, such as monkeys, birds, or fish. After the destruction of the 4 worlds, the gods gathered to create a new sun. 2 deities took on this task. However, the wealthy and powerful Tenochtitlan hesitated, while the poor and sickly Nanahuatzin jumped into the fire without fear. From this act of sacrifice, the new sun emerged. But it did not move at first, so the gods were forced to sacrifice themselves to give it energy. From this idea, the duty of humans was derived to offer blood and hearts to the gods, so that the sun could continue its course and the world would not perish again. This mythology shaped the thinking of the Aztecs in all areas of life. History, war, rituals, and human sacrifice were not separate elements but part of a comprehensive cosmic system. To fully grasp the significance of this world of belief, it is necessary to also consider the historical course of the Aztec civilization, which ultimately ended in a dramatic collapse. Part 9. Historical Overview and the Fall of the Aztec Empire. During the 13th century, an area of extraordinary importance developed in the Valley of Mexico. This territory, characterized by lakes and fertile plains, was called Anahuac by its inhabitants, the land in the midst of the waters. Numerous city-states existed in this region, among which 2 political powers stood out: Culhuacan in the south and Azcapotzalco in the northeast. When the Aztecs migrated into this area, they did not initially appear as rulers, but as a wandering people without a fixed place of settlement. Interestingly, the Aztecs did not refer to themselves by this name. The term Aztecs is derived from Aztlán, a mythical place of origin from which numerous peoples of Mesoamerica are said to have come. Where Aztlán was actually located is unknown to this day, and many historians assume that it is a purely legendary place. The Aztecs called themselves Mexica. When they arrived in the densely populated Valley of Mexico, they initially secured their survival by serving as mercenaries for the ruling powers Culhuacan and Azcapotzalco. A decisive turning point occurred when the Mexica asked the ruler of Culhuacan to give them his daughter for a religious ritual. Due to linguistic misunderstandings, the ruler believed it was a political marriage and agreed. However, when he later witnessed a priest wearing a garment made from his daughter's skin, he realized that she had been sacrificed. Horrified, he had the Mexica pursued and expelled from Culhuacan. They were pushed toward Lake Texcoco, where they finally beheld a divine sign on a small swampy island. According to legend, they saw an eagle sitting on a cactus, holding a snake in its claws. This sign was taken as a message from their patron god, Huitzilopochtli. At this location, they founded the city of Tenochtitlan, which rapidly developed into their political and religious center. About 50 years after its founding, the community was strong enough to transform from a tribal organization into a monarchy. The first ruler, Acamapichtli, dedicated much of his reign to consolidating diplomatic relations and initially accepted the role of a vassal of Azcapotzalco. This dependency did not last long, however. Together with the city-states of Texcoco and Tlacopan, the Mexica rose up against Azcapotzalco, defeated the old power, and founded the so-called Triple Alliance. Within this alliance, the Aztecs rapidly developed into the dominant force. They subjugated numerous territories from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific without completely destroying their opponents. Instead, they allowed the subjugated peoples to preserve their religions and traditions, but demanded regular tribute payments and recognition of the superiority of the Aztec gods. This policy made the empire wealthy and powerful, but also meant that the Aztecs were feared more than they were respected. Under the reign of Moctezuma the Firm, the empire was further consolidated, while his successor implemented extensive social and political reforms and strengthened religious ideology. The Aztecs declared themselves the chosen people of the gods and legitimized their expansion as a divine mission. Tenochtitlan grew into a magnificent metropolis with countless temples, palaces, and monumental buildings. At the beginning of the 16th century, the Aztec Empire reached its greatest extent under Moctezuma II. The population of the empire is estimated at 5 to 6 million people, while up to 250,000 inhabitants lived in Tenochtitlan alone. At that time, the city was one of the largest and most impressive metropolises in the world. Yet, just at the height of its power, the empire faced a threat it could not have foreseen. In the early 16th century, the Spanish Empire, under the rule of Charles V, who was also the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, began to expand its influence on the American continent. After 2 exploratory voyages, the Spaniards sent a third expedition in 1519 under the leadership of Hernán Cortés. With about 500 soldiers, modern weapons, and valuable interpreters, Cortés landed on the coast and founded the settlement of Veracruz as a base of operations. Cortés quickly forged alliances with indigenous peoples who suffered under Aztec rule, promising them liberation from tribute and oppression. Step by step, he marched toward Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma II was overwhelmed by the arrival of the strangers and hesitated to act decisively. He possibly saw the Spaniards as messengers of the god Quetzalcoatl, whose return had been prophesied, and finally allowed them to enter the city. The Spaniards were housed in a magnificent palace, but soon recognized the danger of their situation. Tenochtitlan lay on an island, and the wooden bridges could be destroyed at any time. To ensure their safety, they took Moctezuma II prisoner and made him their hostage ruler. While Cortés temporarily left the city, tensions escalated. His deputy had numerous Aztec nobles and warriors massacred during a religious festival, which triggered an open uprising. After Cortés returned, he tried in vain to bring the situation under control. Moctezuma II was killed during the unrest, and the Spaniards had no choice but to flee the city. In the so-called Noche Triste, sorrowful night, they suffered heavy losses but were able to escape. The Aztecs viewed this retreat as a great victory, but their triumph was short-lived. An introduced smallpox epidemic spread rapidly and significantly weakened the population, as there was no immunity to this disease. In May 1521, Cortés returned with reinforced troops and numerous indigenous allies and began the siege of Tenochtitlan. For 3 months, the Aztecs put up fierce resistance, but hunger, disease, and military inferiority took their toll. On August 13, 1521, the city fell, and the last ruler surrendered. With the fall of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations of the New World, came to an end. Conclusion: the legacy of the Aztec civilization. The fall of the Aztec Empire marked not only the end of a political power, but also the end of a unique worldview that had been shaped over centuries. With the fall of Tenochtitlan, palaces, temples, and institutions disappeared. But the Aztec civilization itself did not simply vanish into history. Its traces remained, hidden in the language, culture, and traditions of the people of Central America. Often, Aztec culture is reduced to the subject of human sacrifice. However, this image is too narrow and fails to recognize the complexity of a society that possessed a highly developed agricultural system, sophisticated urban planning, a compulsory education system, and a profound understanding of the cosmos and time. The Aztecs created one of the largest cities of the ancient world, developed efficient agricultural methods such as the chinampas, and organized their community according to clear social, religious, and political principles. Their mythology and belief shaped not only rituals, but determined the actions of entire generations. War, sacrifice, and duty were not acts of blind violence for them, but part of a cosmic system intended to ensure the continued existence of the world. In this worldview, humans were not masters of nature, but part of a delicate balance between gods, earth, and sky. Even after the Spanish conquest, many elements of Aztec culture survived. Language, agricultural knowledge, religious ideas, and artistic traditions continued to work in secret and merged into the emerging colonial society. Modern-day Mexico still carries this origin within it, not only in symbols such as the eagle on the cactus, but also in the cultural memory of its people. The history of the Aztecs is therefore more than a report on the rise and fall of an empire. It is an example of how human societies can produce complex civilizations under specific geographical and historical conditions. Their legacy serves as a reminder that advanced civilizations should not be measured by their duration alone, but by the depth of their thought, their organization, and their understanding of the world and humanity.